19th century Germany was an intellectual battleground, serving as a highly charged crucible for sociological and philosophical thought. Thinkers like Max Weber approached the study of sociology through a strict analytical lens, seeking to neutrally observe and categorize the structures of human behavior. Karl Marx broke with this tradition, charting a path that prioritized the dynamics of class conflict over the maintenance of institutional stability. Where his peers separated academic study from political outcome, Marx explicitly embedded a controversial activist orientation into his theoretical framework. His sociological framework was an aggressive, engineered reaction to the dominant academic philosophies of his time. How exactly did an abstract German philosophy regarding the spirit of culture evolve into a concrete blueprint for violent economic revolution? The shift from dialectical idealism to dialectical materialism traces the path from abstract philosophy to concrete revolution. Marx arrived at this transition through a systematic, logical dismantling of his predecessors' theories. To grasp the rigorous mechanics of his economic conclusions, we have to trace this specific chain of philosophical handoffs. Marx's ultimate theory is a direct structural inversion of classical German philosophy, explicitly weaponized to expose economic exploitation. In the early 19th century, the intellectual landscape was entirely dominated by Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a philosophical bedrock who deeply influenced a young Marx. Hegel's philosophy rested on two core concepts. The first was the dialectic, a view of the world driven by highly dynamic processes and inherent conflict. This flowchart represents Hegel's second core concept, idealism. Here, the human mind sits at the foundation, actively projecting the material world upward. The mind alone is the significant reality, reducing the material world to a mere byproduct of consciousness. When applying the dialectic to this framework, historical change occurs because abstract ideas clash and resolve in the mind, sending ripples upward to alter physical reality. While elegantly structured, many later disciples began to criticize this highly abstract, mind-centric system. In Hegel's system, the engine of history is driven entirely by abstract ideas, leaving the physical, economic world as a secondary projection. Ludwig Feuerbach provided the intermediate critique, attempting to ameliorate Hegel's overemphasis on pure consciousness and the spirit of culture. Feuerbach argued that the flow of causality was backward. It is human society that projects abstract concepts, rather than abstract concepts generating society. This diagram illustrates Feuerbach's counterproposal. Human society sits squarely at the bottom, projecting its own ideals upward into a hallowed, separate position it calls God. This projection process distances humanity from its own uplifting attributes, transferring that intrinsic power to the projected deity above. Feuerbach proved that the abstract mind wasn't the source of reality. Human society manufactures its own ideals and mistakenly alienates itself from them. Marx closely studied both Hegel and Feuerbach, yet he critically rejected their lingering reliance on psychological and mental processes. Marx demanded a structural inversion of the entire hierarchy. Everything must be reduced to a hard material base. He retained the analytical utility of Hegel's dialectical conflict, but violently stripped it from the theoretical realm of ideas. Marx insisted this dialectical process be applied strictly to the study of economics. The friction driving change was now entirely physical. This epistemological inversion effectively shifted the battleground of history from the abstract realm of philosophy directly down to the concrete reality of the factory floor. To map the mechanics of this material base, Marx turned to the rigorous work of classical political economists like David Ricardo and Adam Smith. Through their studies, Marx isolated surplus value as the mathematical and material root of capitalist exploitation. This chart diagrams the first step of Marx's economic loop. The wage earners generate the total value of a product entirely through their physical labor. In the second step, the capitalist extracts their profit at the direct expense of those laborers, capturing the surplus value. Finally, this surplus value is siphoned off and reinvested directly back into the economic system, scaling up the physical machinery. The notoriously fast growth rates of capitalist systems rely entirely on the continuous, unbroken acceleration of this extraction loop. Marx formulated capitalism as a system where growth is tied directly to the rate of labor value extracted from the worker. Over time, the continuous, accelerating extraction of surplus value within the capitalist framework generates intense systemic instability. The human cost of this engine is severe alienation. The laborer is structurally severed from the value of their work, the products they manufacture, and the society around them. This visual represents the systemic sociological outcome of that instability, absolute class polarization between the capitalists and the proletariat. Every cycle of reinvestment forces these two classes further to extreme opposite ends of the societal spectrum, hollowing out the middle. For Marx, this growing polarization was not a policy failure or an accident. It was a mathematically guaranteed feature of the capitalist social formation. Capitalism is an inherently doomed architecture that drives society towards an unavoidable structural fracture. Unlike traditional conservative sociologists who passively sought only to document societal shifts, Marx refused to let his theory remain a passive observation. He embedded it with a radical activist orientation. This is the core of Marxian ideology, a teleological imperative that the alienated proletariat must inevitably respond to this polarization. Because the surplus value, the very engine of profit, is rooted in exploitation, Marx argued that reform within the system was impossible. This internal logic necessitated a violent overthrow to break the cycle of private ownership. This revolution demands the forced physical dispossession of the capitalist class, stripping them of their factories, industries, and banks. Within the academic community, this polemical ideology created an immediate and hostile backlash. Conservative peers had been bred to fear the disruptions of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. They were horrified by Marx's embrace of anarchy, leading to the deliberate eclipse of his dialectical materialism in standard sociology. But Marx viewed this violent, bloody overthrow as a mere transitional mechanism to reach his final theoretical endpoint, an era of social harmony achieved solely through the total community ownership of the means of production. Marx's dialectical materialism provides the mathematical justification for dismantling the capitalist state and organizing society around community ownership.